Welcome, everybody. This is our 9th session for the study group for Identity Access Management. We're continuing to talk about OAuth, and this time we're going to focus a lot on OAuth Management sessions, some additional terms, and connected apps. Next week will be session number 10, and next week is when we're going to go through as many of the OAuth flows as we can. I've started to combine them because there's a lot more than there used to be, but some of them are very similar to each other. So I'll put them together on how they go together, and we can talk about the different flows and how you use them. But for today, we're going to work on OAuth management. So OAuth, we're going to go over some slides, and I also have a demo for one of my dev orgs, and then we'll have some questions at the end as well. So managing API access. So by default, in your Salesforce org, any user has access to API access. And some of that makes sense because if you want them to have access to data loader, Workbench, or any third-party app that uses API, you want them to be able to access that data. But really, when you think about it from an identity and access management perspective, you really want to make sure that you have the right level of access for your users. Right now, in theory, if you have your org open, somebody can go to Excel, they can use the Excel connector to connect to your Salesforce data, and they can start running their own reports and mining it from Excel. Some people think that's a good thing, and it can be, but security would probably not be happy with you about that. So just keep in mind that by default, all this is open, and you want to see if you can improve on the security that you have on your environment. So let's talk about how you can do that. So there are the main features that you use to manage API access is through OAuth, and we're going to look at the connected app. There's a feature called API access control. You can enable cores to make sure that different applications that should have access to those resources. And then there's a general OAuth and OpenID Connect settings. We're also going to talk a little about how you revoke an application if somebody has done something you don't want them to do. So connected apps are at the heart of how you access the API for OAuth. Every one of the flows but one of the OAuth flows requires a connected app to be used because it's really what has all the settings behind it. And so for that connected app, when it comes to who has access to it, you have 3 access options. The first 2 are available by default. All users may authorize. Only pre-authorized users may access it. And then the third one is allow admin approved users only. This one requires a feature to be enabled. You have to raise a case with Salesforce. They enable the feature, and once you enabled it, you can start using it. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But all of these sections are in the Manage section for the connected app, and I'll show you that in just a second. And for the pre-authorized options, you can select what profiles and permission sets have ability to use this particular connected app. One of the things to consider for your connected app is you can also set the session settings on your connected app. Let's say you don't do that on the connected app. The way that this works is Salesforce is going to use whatever you have set up. So if you only have the org session set up, it's going to default to that. If you have the connected app saying, well, my org can have a 2-hour session, but I want this connected app to only have 1 hour, the connected app wins. But if you have it further refined on the user profile, and you have this particular profile has to re-authenticate every 30 minutes, as an example, then the profile wins. So the profile is going to be the one that always wins, followed by connected app, and then by the org session settings. So a lot like a lot of other access in Salesforce, there's a funnel that you need to think of, and know that the profile is the narrowest part of the funnel, with the org settings being the largest. So let's look at a connected app. So first off, where do you find connected apps? I always lose them, which is why I'm mentioning that. And so connected apps live under App Manager. If you go to where you think you would find them in Quick Find, and you go to connected apps, you'll find other things related to connected apps, but it's not what you need. So where it says manage connected apps, it might be where you're looking for, but for me, almost always I'll go to App Manager because this actually has the ability for me, let me go to one that I actually own, the ability for me to view it, edit it, or manage it. If I go to manage connected apps, I only have access to the last one. So I created a test one. It's just for us to play with. So when you go to the connected app, I left it pretty basic, just named it test. I gave it Here's where I gave it the OAuth scopes, which is why you really have to have a connected app for your flows, because otherwise your flows don't know how to give you resources. And all of these, we'll go through all of these next week when we're talking about the different flows. So today, don't worry about them, but know this is where they live. You can think of this as this page is set up by the developer or the architect, because this really is what's going to drive how that API access is used. For the admin, once this has been set up, you go to manage. And here is where you have permitted users who can use this. So let's go into edit because it's a little bit easier to see it. And so here you can either have all users may self-authorize or only admin approved users are pre-authorized. Almost always you want to use this one, unless you have the most secure setting that we'll talk about in a little bit, because this really allows you to say, no, this connected app can only be used by the users that I know should be using it. So let's hit cancel. And you'll see that I only had 2 options in there. And then down here, I would be able to add either the profiles or the permission sets that are able to use this connected app. So this is where you're really saying, whatever this does, and this one I have as full access for the scopes. And so this particular connected app can do just about anything. The only thing it can't do is pull back a refresh token because it's not one of the scopes that's set up. And right now I have the refresh token will expire immediately, but let's change that because I also want you to see that. Oh, it's not letting me change it. Why not? I'll have to look up why it's not giving me my other token policies. It might be because of the scope that I have selected. So let me see. For the life of me, I also don't know how to go back to my connected app list without going to App Manager again. If you hit back, it does not let you actually get to the page, it just skips it. And you remember I said I only have one scope in here because we talked about scopes a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to add the refresh token scope. Save it. It'll tell me it takes 10 minutes for this to actually work. We're not going to use this, it doesn't matter. And now when I go back to manage, and edit. Now, because now this connected app is returning a refresh token, now I can actually set the settings on it. Before it wasn't returning a refresh token, so obviously you couldn't do anything to it. It would just immediately, it doesn't exist, so it just set it to immediately expire. But here I can say that it's valid until revoked. That's what most people use. But depending on your security needs, you may want to say this refresh token expires after 90 days or a year or some time frame. That way it's not forever available. So I'll hit save. Let's go back over here and make sure I covered all the things. So, oh, session settings. Where are my session settings? So here's my timeout. So here's where I would be able to say on the connected app, how long do I want these access tokens or reverse access tokens to last? And you can see it can go up to 24 hours, but I can make it either very restrictive if I wanted to be authorized every 15 minutes, I can do that, or I can do every day. And again, the connected app, if I have something set here, it will take precedence over the org. But if the user has something more restrictive, the user profile is what's going to take precedence over these session policies. A lot of people just do them in 2 hours, and then developers often will get a new token every hour, even if it's every 2 hours, because that way they know that they always have a valid access token and they don't have to worry about it actually expiring on the user. So I'll hit cancel. Let's see. So we talked about the settings. It's under manage. You add the profiles and the permission sets. Down here is who has access. And then you have the session settings. We're not going to talk about this one yet. We'll come back to it in a second. So any questions there? You guys okay there? All right, we'll keep going. So now let's talk about that third option that's very restrictive. I do not have it enabled in my dev org, so I will not be able to demo it for you, but it's called API Access Control. This is what requires you to create a case with Salesforce to enable this feature. After the feature has been enabled, you would be able to have a new option under setup, and it's called API Access Control. What this lets you do is it lets you lock down every single bit of API access unless it's been approved through a connected app. And so what that really lets you do is anything, third-party app exchange, workbench, data loader, Excel, anything you can think of that can use a connected app would need to be pre-approved before it can be used. So the admin sets this up, and then on each connected app, you have to go through and add profiles and permission sets for the right users to have access to it. What is interesting to me is the UI becomes a source of truth. So whatever you have set up on your connected app is what is correct. If you were to query this at the object level, it actually gives you all the different options that are available for it, but they're not actually the same thing as this in UI. So if your company goes through, if you're a healthcare or a finance organization that you decide to turn this on, because obviously it's the most secure to meet auto regulations, you just want to make sure that if you have developers working on it, they're not relying on the API and whatever they get back, that they know the UI is what determines who has access to the application. Of course, Salesforce keeps saying this everywhere on the help documents. Make sure that all of your managed packages, all of your integrations are tested before you enable this in production. And when you do request this to be enabled in your orgs, you can tell the as part of the case what org you want to enable this on. So let's say you only want to enable it in your full sandbox, you can do that. And then once it's fully tested, open a second case, get it enabled in production, and then enable it there. That will guarantee nobody can accidentally turn it on without you knowing about it. But if you're not worried about that, if you have a small team and you really do it all, you can enable it on both orgs at the same time. So for this one, any questions? Because this one I can't demo. I don't have it in my org. It just really locks things down. All right, we'll keep going. So CORS. Oh, look, I took off the definition. So CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. I'll add it back to the presentation before I post it. And so what this happens is if you have different applications that are using resources from Salesforce, you want to make sure that they have permission to use those resources. By default, Salesforce actually enables some of the endpoints without you having to do anything. They're listed here. It's OpenID configuration, auth configuration, and ID keys. The first two return information about how OpenID is set up and how SAML is set up. So it kind of makes sense it's automatically enabled because you want to be able to have other applications understand what they're supposed to do to gain access to your application. The ID keys has to do with the user information. So if you've been authenticated and you want to get the information about the user, you can call the ID keys endpoint and get that information. And again, any application, even if they're not set up on CORS, is able to access this information by default. It's pretty safe information to share, so it makes sense to me that Salesforce will do that automatically. You can enable additional OAuth endpoints by going to the UI and setting that up. If you're using my domain name, or if you're calling these endpoints from an Experience Cloud, you can enable CORS for these three endpoints: token, revoke, and introspect. You do that in setup. You go to your quick find, you type in CORS, and this is one that I was surprised it's the short version, not the long version, and then you're going to hit enable CORS for auth endpoints. If you have a particular need to have one specific website be put on the allowed list, you can do that, but it's only going to work for one endpoint called user info, and then you can add them there. So let's look at that together on the org. So here I already have my CORS tab open, and just like I said, you go in quick find and you type in CORS and you see it right there. And here you have cross-origin resource sharing, and I have not enabled it yet, but if I want to enable those three endpoints we talked about here, token, revoke, and introspect, We'll go into edit, we'll enable it, and then you save it. And this is true for any connected app. So you're doing this at the org level. You're not doing this at the connected app level. If I wanted to add a specific website, I could add it here. And I've had to do that in the past when I was working at a prior job. We were going to have one website access the data from Salesforce. So we had to add the domain name here to allow them to access data. So that's cross-origin resource sharing. A lot of times you'll have an application that is fully set up with OAuth and you're just getting errors saying you're not allowed to use these resources and you want to know that you have to go to CORS. I vaguely remember a question around CORS when I took the certification last year, but it's been pretty long. And it was one of those scenarios of your developer has fully tested your connected app and was able to connect to it, but now that they're accessing it from the website, they're getting an error. What can be a possible reason? So just be comfortable with the CORS. Let's go to the next section. So OAuth flow settings. Next week, we're going to talk about all the flows in detail. But what I thought was interesting is Salesforce lets you enable or disable 3 flows at the org level. And the 3 of them are allow OAuth username and password flow. That's enabled by default. User agent flows, also enabled by default. And then authorization code and credentials flow is actually disabled by default. And so these first 2 are going to be very similar to what you've probably done in the past if you've used Workbench. You go to Workbench, you log in. The first time you do that, it gives you that screen of, do you want to allow us access to this data? When you say yes, what you're going through right there is the user agent flow. And so it's using your OAuth information, it's going through and getting the authorization code, the access token. And when you say yes, you're allowed to do that, it's going back to Workbench and saying you've been authenticated, authorized, and you have access to these scopes. I mean, that's the user agent flow. Last week, I shared with you my screen for Pandora that wanted me to put in my username and password in the screen. That would be the username and password flow that I would have to share that with the device for me to be able to log into my Pandora account. Because I was traveling, I did not want to do that in my hotel, so I didn't do that. But that was pretty innocuous, right? But I was surprised. You'll see next week that the authorization code is actually a very broadly used flow, and it is disabled by default. You are able to create a connected app with this flow, even when this is disabled. So again, if you get a question about you fully set up the connected app, but you're getting an error, what does an admin do to fix that? You need to go to the setup screen to look at which flows have been enabled and disabled. So let's go there. So you go to setup, quick find, OAuth and OpenID Connect settings is what you're looking for. And obviously, if you disable any of these, you can affect integrations and manage packages. And of course, you're going to test in the sandbox. And just like I said, Salesforce keeps repeating this everywhere, but I know you always test everything in a sandbox. You never do anything in production, right? So let's look at that screen. And so here is, and so OAuth and OpenID Connect settings takes you to that exact page. And I left this as default. You can see the first 2 are enabled and the third one is disabled. The third one, like I said, is very broadly used. And when you disable this, you actually disable multiple other flows. There's one that's called a hybrid flow. You would also be disabling that. And so you want to be careful that if it's already enabled in your org and you go disable it, you might be affecting more things than you realize. So that's these. Any questions there? You guys are easy today. All right, let's talk about revoking access. And again, all of this today is about managing access and what you do with it. So developers can, of course, revoke access tokens, and they can do that via the endpoint called Revoke. They can either revoke an individual access token, and that's going to revoke just that one access token that you're sending. Makes perfect sense. Or the developer can revoke the refresh token. And when you do that, it's going to revoke the refresh token and all associated access tokens that were generated from that refresh token if they're still active. And so it's doing really a whole cleanup of the whole thing. And so the developers can do that. As an admin, you can go to the UI and you can also revoke either an individual user's access to a token, or you can completely block access to a connected app. And I'll show you that in a second. I forgot the end of the slide, so I'll fix that before I post it as well. So let's go look at where you revoke access to connected apps. So you go to connected app OAuth usage, and then here I installed this Trailblazer Me connected app just because I wanted to play with it. And you can see I have a couple other ones. If you've never used Apex Sandbox IO, it's a pretty cool website. You can test your coding skills. And so I've used it in this one, so it's connected here. I don't remember, maybe I've used VS Code with this sandbox, so it's connected to the CLI. I have authenticated to Trailhead on this org, so that's why that's here. And then here's a connected app. But you can see I can install, block them, or uninstall the one that I installed, and here's the user. So here, if you want to go see what your users are doing with their API access, you go to connected app OAuth usage, and you can see, oh, somebody is using the Excel connector, somebody is using Power BI, or whatever tool they decided to use to connect to your data. And you can see what they're using and who it is. So we'll go to the one that's installed right now, and we'll look at the user. Big surprise, it's me. And here is my particular username, and then here I can revoke this user from using this application if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to mess up this org for myself. I can revoke all users if I want to, or just individual users. So going back over here, again, I've never installed these apps on my org. This one I did earlier today. So let's say that I wanted to install Apex IO. So here you can see I have managed app policies. Before I do that, let me go back to App Manager. So under App Manager, you can see Trailblazer.me, because that's the one that I installed earlier. But you can see there's nothing here about Apex IO. So unless you go to the page for, for OAuth usage, you will not see all of the apps that are connected to your environment. So here I can see Apex Sandbox, but it's not listed anywhere here. So let's go ahead and install it. So now I am going to allow it because I'm going to install it. And are you sure? Yes, I want to go ahead and do that. And once I do that, I can manage the policies on it. So before, the person that was connected to it, they can do whatever they wanted to it. But now if I want to say no, all users cannot self-authorize. Only people that I allow to do it are going to be able to do it. And it's going to tell me if you change these settings, you might break something. Or I want to say that the refresh token is going to expire if not used in so many days. Now I can manage all of these policies in my org, even though I didn't originally install the connected app. Once I actually install it, I can do this. And this would also be true with third-party app exchange packages. I know my company uses Conversocial, and this is one of the ways that I found that they were using Conversocial because a user had connected directly with their account, and I was able to see what they had done to it. So I don't want to break this, so I'm going to leave it under all users authorized because I have not tested this, and I'll save it. And so you can see that understanding who has connected to your org with a connected app is really important. You can either block the whole thing if you don't want that to have access to your org. You can install or uninstall it, and then you can either revoke all users or revoke individual users one at a time. The only thing that's not going to show up here is if a user connected with what's called a SAML token. So they were logged into their website application and they were able to connect to that connected app, and all they used was their SAML token. That's called an implicit flow. And those, because they expire when the session expires. So as soon as my profile or my org says your session's over, it's been 2 hours, we're going to log you out. Those don't show up here, but those are pretty low risk because those don't continue to live beyond when the user granted access. And that application should not have a refresh token for them to be able to continue to get access to it. So those are the only ones that don't show up here. But again, so if your OAuth flow requires you to set up a connected app for it, it will show up here. The one that doesn't require it is the one that does not show up here, which kind of makes sense. Questions? Lots of information today about managing your tokens. So that's it for the slides today. Let's go to our quiz, if you guys are ready. And let me find it. There we go. All right, can you guys still see my screen and can you see the quiz? I posted the link on chat. If you didn't get it, let me know. But you could also see it here. Actually, I bet you I gave you the wrong link.
It's asking for access code.
Yeah, let me give you a different link because I gave you the wrong one. I forgot to change it. So you may need to refresh your screen. And let me test it along with you guys to make sure that I see it work correctly. Okay, mine's working now. And so you should see what I see here. OAuth Management. Oops. All right. And just like before, whenever I can, I give you the resource links. Just don't click on them until you've answered your question. And then if you haven't logged in, go ahead and log in. And then I will do the same thing. I think today we have 10 or 11 questions. We should be able to get through most of them by 7. And so we'll get started. Question 1, 11 questions. What is CORS? Select one answer. Awesome. Cross-origin resource sharing is correct. Nice job. Question 2. Oh, I forgot to cover this one, so I apologize, but you might still know it. What is CSFR? Select one answer. And so this one is about forgery. And so whenever you are connecting your website to Salesforce, if you do not have what's called the CSFR token, Salesforce rejects your request because they think that you're a forgery request. There's a man in the middle trying to take the information. So whenever you're, and again, we'll talk about this next week, but whenever you're requesting resources from an experience site like Lightning Web Components or a Visualforce page or any content from website, this gets included to make sure that the application that's requesting those resources is the one that is actually should be getting it back. So, and I have a problem with the order of these letters, but CSFR is about forgery requests, and that's really what I end up focusing on, the forgery part. I forgot to cover that one. Sorry about that. I just covered it together. All right, question 3. If the user profile has a different session than the connected app, what is used to expire the access token? Select one answer. 15 seconds. So everybody's correct, and my question is wrong. So the user profile is correct. I will change the question on the quiz before we publish it. You guys are all correct, and so am I, because it is user profile. That's what happens when you create these really, really fast before the session. All right, question 4. What happens when an access token is revoked? Select one answer. This is the access token. Twenty seconds. Go. And so only the specified access token is revoked. If you do the refresh token, then it's both the refresh token and anything related to it. And so it's just the access token. So if the application still has a refresh token and you only revoke the access token, they can continue to get new ones. So whenever you want to, if you want to stop an application's complete access, you would have to revoke the refresh token to get all of them revoked as well. Next question, question 5. How does an admin pre-approve users for connected apps? Select 2 answers. Really bad spelling. Fifteen seconds. So really bad spelling on my part, but you would be doing the profile and the permission set on the connected app. You're not able to assign specific users to them. Yes, the pro-routes are really, really dangerous. Go to the next question. Question 6. By default, what OAuth flow is disabled? Select one answer. About 20 seconds. Yep. OAuth code and credential flows. Nice job. Next question. Question 7. Connected apps must be installed to be available for users to use the app. Select one answer. True or false? 15 seconds. And this one is false. If you remember, we went to the connected app usage, and that's how I found out that my users were using Conversocial because they had connected directly. And that's where you would be able to see if somebody is using Workbench that's not supposed to, or any other app. And so you don't have to install a connected app to use it in Salesforce. It's kind of weird to me that you don't have to. And let me see if I still have the window open somewhere. I seem to have lost it. But on the connected app page, OAuth sessions, you can go see all the connected apps that are currently in use, and you can either install them if you actually want to install them. Once you install them, you can manage all of the settings on it for who can have access to it, session settings, and when the token gets revoked. You can also block the connected app because you didn't install it and you don't want them to be there, or you can block individual users on their tokens from that particular connected app. So let's take Workbench. You wanted users to use, you can install it on your org. You can say only admin approved users can use it. And then you can revoke all the users that should not have access to it and just keep the ones that should, like your super users. Next question. Question 8. What happens when a refresh token is revoked? Select one answer. Fifteen more seconds. Correct. The refresh token and associated access tokens are revoked. Nice job. Next question. Admins may not revoke connected apps at the user level, only block at the connected app level. True or false? Fifteen seconds. Correct. You can do the user level. You can revoke all the users at the same time, and you can block at the connected app level as well. Question 10. What endpoints are automatically enabled for cores? Select one answer. Fifteen seconds. And this one was awful close. So OpenID configuration, auth configuration both give you information about how the org is set up. And then the user information gives you ID keys. Token is not automatically enabled for course. You have to enable that for it to be available for my domain name and experience sites. Next question. Last question. Set the order used for session setting for connected app. And this should be from broadest to narrowest, I think. We'll see which one it is. Five seconds. That's just not in the right order, so sorry. I'll fix the question and I'll make sure it's clear because this one even confused me in looking at it. So I'll fix that. Let's see how we all did, even with the two questions that were completely set up wrong. Kels, nice job. So as always, if you guys give me feedback on the quiz, I'd appreciate it. Obviously, I need to fix 2 of those questions and a couple of typos because plurals are really bad. And does anybody have any questions about today's session? No? All right, so I'm going to stop recording and then I have one more question for you guys.